Hello and welcome to this edition of the Deep Dive Perspective. You know, we pick topics which are going to really be controversial and people who are so supposedly controversial. Today's no exception. We've got Dr. Rihanna Ali back in the studio to follow up our conversation with her from several months ago, where she was being essentially hounded by the GMC and anti-Semitic movements, lobbies. Court cases have happened. Things have been flying around in terms of updates on that very case. We've also got in the studio Dr. Rihanna Ali Adwan, who's another doctor who seems to be under scrutiny, perhaps a witch hunt as well. And there is an indication that Muslim doctors with pro-Palestinian views, and ethnic minorities in general are being discriminated against by the General Medical Council. But there is a hint of a kind of a sort of Zionist lobby involved in so many of these cases. I want to unpack whether there is an undue power in the background which the Zionists wield, which is discriminating against doctors and preventing them from doing the job that they're meant to be. And is it really right that doctors shouldn't have a political opinion? Is it that professionals aren't allowed to say anything that's going on in the world? Are they sworn to silence? And is there discrimination going on within the institutions beyond GMC? Because we've had Wes Streeting on this particular case now weighing in, part of the British government, who's actually going around threatening that he's going to change laws and legislation because he hasn't had his way with the case that Dr. Rihanna Ali was being hunted down with. Extraordinary situation, but let me bring in Rihanna and Dr. Adwan. Welcome to the show, both of you guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm going to start, of course, with you, Rihanna, and the audience that doesn't know what was going on will need a little bit of background. So give me a little overview just of where you've got to, and this final hearing, etc., that you've had to go and take to the high courts. That's where you'll take us eventually. But a little context first.
Okay, so I'll keep it brief because a lot has been happening. So the harassment began in March 2024 when I first became aware of it. Actually became aware of it in May, but the initial complaint came from Nasher Jew. So Nasher Jew is a particularly vitriolic organization, pretty hidden. We think that some of the individuals we can identify, and it's a very pro-Israeli organization. That in conjunction with Lawyers for Israel, LFI, had put in a complaint to the GMC. Now, when I was on last time round, I talked about the fact that there was obviously, the GMC said there was no, they didn't meet the threshold for investigation. I've seen disclosures from Lawyers for Israel since, where they clearly knew they didn't have enough information because they're asking each other, do we have enough to report her for? Okay, so they reported me. That didn't go anywhere. When I ran for the Bradford South parliamentary elections in last year, Jewish Medical Association complained about me twice. Okay, both of those were dismissed as not meeting the threshold for investigation. And obviously, those attempts to silence me on my kind of Palestinian advocacy hadn't worked. So that's when the pressure was ramped up. And in November last year, I had a complaint, but this time not from an organization, from an individual who was clearly a political Zionist, most likely Jewish. And I've since, through disclosures, he or she is Jewish. And I made the assumption and I made the allegation that this was collusion. And since I was last on the show, I had disclosures from the Lawyers for Israel. And this doctor was Jewish, was in communication with LFI, and the JMA, that's through his own email.
The LFI and the GMA.
So the Jewish Medical Association and the Lawyers for Israel, when he or she put in their complaint to the GMC. And the GMC would never confirm who this individual was, which I believe I had a right to know. In addition, this doctor had copied in the Community Security Trust, and there was clearly pressure because at that point, if you recall, Wes Streeting was making the remarks that the GMC must clamp down on anti-Semitism, okay? So I do believe that pressure from Wes Streeting led to the same tweets that had been previously dismissed as not being anti-Jewish because I believe that's the correct term, not anti-Semitic. And I was put forward for what's called an interim order tribunal, IOT. And that panel doesn't make a decision on fact. What they do is, normally that would be reserved for someone, say if you'd harmed a patient, okay, could you work in the interim while you're being investigated? And that panel I could not attend, but they went ahead in my absence. And to keep it short, the transcript doesn't talk about a suspension at all. They were talking about trying to put conditions on my speech. But however, the panel came back after a discussion and decided to suspend me for 18 months, which I think is unknown. No other medic has been suspended for 18 months for speech. Okay?
And the tweets, so I remember you telling us that the tweets were actually, they weren't overtly anti-Semitic. I mean, they remind me of the tweets and remind the audience of what the actual tweet that really bothered them was.
I would, I'm going to push back a little bit here. I would deny that they were anti-Semitic at all. Right. Because first of all, most Jews are not Semitic people, right? I'm sitting next to Dr. Adwan, who is Palestinian Jordanian. She's a Semite, okay? So I think that, so they're accusing me, and this is what I explained to the panel and to the judge in the High Court, and I'll come on to that actually what you're accusing me of is anti-Jewish hatred, okay? And there's not a single tweet which you will find, amongst all the litany, all the ones you've quoted, which demonstrate anti-Jewish hatred. There's no irrational hatred of Jews for being Jews. What I have criticized is Israel, and I have criticized Israeli behavior, which I have every right to do when 300,000 people have been massacred. And so these tweets were included, for example, because I had one that they used in the media a lot, and they've used it in this week as well, was they said she called Sinwar a legend. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know the law in this country, which obviously they have illegally prescribed Hamas. I don't accept Hamas as a terrorist organization. Okay, it's my legal right to say that Hamas is a resistance group, and they are fighting for liberation. And under the UN General Assembly rules, you can have armed struggle. Armed struggle is legal. And I can argue for its de-prescription. What I can't do is show any support for Hamas. And I haven't done so. The actual tweet that I wrote that they are misquoting was I said that Israel had made a mistake by killing Sinwar, that they had turned Sinwar into a legend, which was obviously based on what was happening around, what happening in the Arab world. And it was happening obviously in America with white Americans, these aren't Muslims, having T-shirts of Sinwar, calling him a hero. Right? So it was political commentary, and it was perfectly legitimate. So they turned that into the headlines of, like, she called Sinwar a legend, okay, and she supports Hamas. So that was the background. Obviously, there was another tweet. It's one that they're fond of quoting, and that tweet was after when they exploded pages in Lebanon and Syria. It was outrageous. They blew up pages that were used by healthcare professionals in civilian places, marketplaces. Civilians were killed, children were killed, okay, and injured.
Yes.
And it was an outrageous breach of international law, condemned by the UN for what that's worth, okay? And I said after that in a short interview that, Israelis could not be trusted with food, near water, and near technology. That, they must not be allowed near humanity. Right. And I defended that tweet, actually, into the panel, okay? Because everyone shouts blood libel, right? They say, that's blood libel. Well, actually, Israelis have poisoned wells in Palestine, okay? That's on record. There's the operation in 1948 where the Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, even wrote in his diaries where they were purchasing, biological toxins. Okay, that's in his own diary. And that cast thigh bread operation in 1948, they were poisoning wells to prevent Arabs from returning to their villages. Sure. The settlers have done that since. They have poisoned crops. They have booby-trapped, they have poisoned, left poisoned food, tinned food. They've booby-trapped toys. They have used quadcopters, which emit the sound of children crying to lure Palestinians out. And then as soon as they come out to look for the crying child, they kill them, okay? So I think I'm perfectly correct to say that Israelis are almost a different breed, okay? That nowhere else, I believe, on this planet will you find a society that is so psychopathic, okay? And just because you find a few exceptions, there is something wrong with Israeli society. And I think the poll after poll supports my view. 82% of Israeli Jews, that's a poll from only a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, showing that 82% of Israeli Jews supported the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Okay, straight after October 2023, only 1.8% of the Israelis being questioned thought the firepower used in Gaza was too excessive. Okay, I mean, this is an extreme society. To try and pretend that it's the Israeli regime or it's the Israeli government or it's Netanyahu is, I think, wrong, and I think it's a way to protect what's happening in Gaza. Like, it's a way to try and deflect. So that was the tweets. I said from the very word go, none of my tweets, show any irrational hatred for Jews for being Jews. My tweets were focused on Israel and Israeli behavior and those who were supporting that behavior. And I would defend those tweets. Obviously, what then happened, very briefly, was that I tried to enlist the help of my indemnity body, which gave me bad advice, okay, which was try and ask for an early review, okay, and they were fairly sure I would get it. The GMC rejected it, okay, so they delayed and then they rejected it. The GMC rejected it very quickly in March. And I then had a decision on what the indemnity body did. Again, often these organizations are, infiltrated with Zionists and they have their own agenda, was effectively, let's wait till June. And I was outraged. My suspension was unlawful. I'm not being suspended on any fact, any proven fact at this point. So, and what I had was a lot of gatekeeping going on. So so you have gatekeeping from the Zionists on one end, and then you have various lawyers that I tried to enlist the help of, and they were uncomfortable with speech because they would gatekeep you from the other end. So they don't want you to, they are perfectly happy for you to criticize Israel, but they don't maybe like the fact that you use the word Holocaust, even though it's a proper descriptor of what's happening in Gaza. Or they don't want you to criticize Israelis, well, even though they are the ones committing the crimes, right? I mean, it was ludicrous that people were gatekeeping to that extent. Or people don't want you talking about Jewish supremacy, which is exactly what Zionism is, because the whole basis of people being massacred, all Netanyahu's statements, the statements of Israeli ministers, the statements of various rabbis in Israel was that we need to kill Amalek. Okay, it was the Old Testament command, and it came from somewhere. And if you read the various passages in the Talmud, because that then explained Gaza. This was my whole issue, that actually when you looked at what was happening in Gaza and you say, well, how could this evil occur? How could it be justified? Well, the explanation came from, extremism within, obviously, Israeli society.
Right. Let me broaden this out a little, Rihanna, because what you say resonates a little, especially this week, because the other person who's been censored on a very high-profile level has been the UN rapporteur, Miss Albanese.
Yeah.
So she was censored, I think, and the Americans, I think, sanctioned her in some way or shape or form. But in Bogota, a meeting of around 8 nations for the first time came together and started looking at practical steps that could be taken against Israel. So what I was going to try to point out was this exceptionalism that you're talking about, and this use of language and terminology and the vagaries of law and the general culture of fear about saying anything about Jewish people is actually something which is happening on the international stage and not just on your own sort of local level here or in Britain alone. So this seems to be not a problem that we're just talking about in terms of the GMC, but it's something which is a cultural issue which has become, enmeshed throughout the globe, really. And I think I have to go back again and say that it's taken 2 years for 8 nations to stand up and do the obvious, which is to sort of start taking some sort of sanctions or some sort of action, some sort of, practical steps to reining in Israel or boycotting it or stopping trade. None of this has happened up to now amongst the majority of the nations. That also arguably, is on the basis that there's this fear of saying the sort of the Israeli Zionist Jewish word, because it's all been conflated. And this is the issue. Here we have the IHRA definition around what it means to be Jewish, and that is what the GMC abide by.
No. So the GMC haven't adopted the IHRA definition. If they had, we'd all be struck off at this point.
Right.
So they haven't adopted it, and they shouldn't dare to adopt it.
Well, that's a point in itself. So how much credence does the IHRA definition have in law in this country and beyond?
So I think, that's where Jeremy Corbyn didn't help, when the anti-Semitism saga occurred in the Labour Party, because he effectively allowed it to be implemented. He bowed to the Israeli lobby over these four cries of anti-Semitism rather than withstand it, and threw a lot of people under the bus. And many Corbyn supporters immediately will recoil at what I just said, because, but I'm not a fan of anyone. And I think, if you deserve criticism, as harsh as that may be, then, everyone, is open to critique. And he threw a lot of people under the bus, and it's basically implemented by certain regulatory bodies, like, for example, the Solicitors Regulatory Authority. They have the IHRA definition. The GMC don't. And that's what the Jewish Medical Association and others are lobbying the GMC to do. So to adopt it, because that would immediately try to stifle any criticism of Israel, essentially, because the two are conflated. But, you talked about the fear, but there's also a second strand to that, and that's actually what you could call, Jewish power, okay? And again, as soon as you say that word, okay, people throw at you, oh, well, that's like, an anti-Semitic trope. Okay, well, it's not.
Well, you can say black power, we could say white power.
Precisely.
Does it have the same reaction?
No, absolutely not. And if you said Jewish supremacy, what I challenged the panel and I challenged the court, and I said, if you replaced my word, if you replaced Israeli with Russian, I mean, one of the tweets was, I said Mossad in 9/11, which is true. I believe that. I've researched it, and there's enough evidence to point towards Israel, okay, rather than basically a bunch of Arabs who couldn't fly properly, okay? So if you replace that word, if you replace it with another country, Russia, China, if you replace it with, Muslim or Christian, nobody would recoil. But people have been conditioned for decades not to say the J word. There's a taboo on it, right? So you can see people literally just flinch as soon as you say the word Jewish. But it's like, well, saying Jewish is not a bad thing. Like, why should it be a bad thing? People can say Jewish when we're praising Jewish people. Then it's always like, I am Jewish, I am a Jew. So then we're asking for an exceptionalism, i.e. that you can never criticize a Jewish person. Right? That's called Jewish privilege then, isn't it? Because that's the point I made to the panel. Right. You're basically saying that if a person happens to do a bad thing and they happen to be Jewish, you can't criticize them because you're going to be an anti-Semite. Right? You can't have that. Let's
pause that. There's a lot to unpack and a lot of powerful stuff has come out. But I'm going to bring Rama into the conversation. You've been patiently listening in a way. So sorry. I had to set the scene, I think, and get some of the past and the present. We haven't gone on to the case fully yet. We'll get on to that shortly as well. But Rihanna is not the only one, obviously, who's being targeted. What's your story, Rama? Where does your situation? I mean, you're Palestinian Jordanian in origin, and presumably that makes you pretty much a kind of a moving target, if you say anything, I guess, within any professional circuit. But what's been your experience?
So I am another target, and I think we're probably up there on the leadership board of attacks, and also who's the number one anti-Semite. But I think mine is more ironic, as I am a Semite, whereas if you're Ashkenazi Jew, you're not a Semite. So my story started when my great granddad was kicked out of Ramallah by the Jewish extremist immigrants who wanted to take us home. So it was, you leave or we murder you and your family. And he had 5 children at the time, and he chose to save them and go to Jordan. And he would go back to see his land on his horseback. But that's where the story really starts. But where the attack started, because if you're Palestinian, your existence is a threat to the terrorist entity of Israel. Because the whole point of establishing Israel is to erase Palestine. So if you exist and you're Palestinian, then you threaten their so-called existence when it's the other way around.
Right.
So I have been advocating for Palestine my whole life, so is my mother. But the first attack was Nashr Jew. They came for me first, actually, so I think I win that one.
What year was that?
That was 2023.
Right.
That was in December. My friend sent me the doxing profile, and my heart dropped because I'm pretty junior, I guess. I've been in the NHS for 4 years, and I've never been called in. I've never made an error. I've never hurt anybody. I've never had a patient complaint. And then seeing, me in scrubs and a full doxing profile, and I'm an anti-Semite, etc. So I was quite scared.
Wow.
But I got over it quite quick. My mum was very worried about me. Your career, you worked hard for this. And then nothing really happened after that until about March, April, when I got an email. I was leaving work. I was in London. I was leaving work at 10 o'clock, and I was meant to finish at 8. But I actually had a patient from Gaza. He was coming here to actually be a witness in court against Elbit Systems because
the Israeli military hardware producing outfit.
The biggest private weapons manufacturer. Yeah, and we have 13 sites in Britain. There used to be 16, but Palestine Action, which are now a proscribed organization, they shut down 3 of them, but we still have 13, and 4 of them are factories. So we make the drones here for Elbit Systems. They make them here. We're using our British taxes. Then they get sent to the terrorist entity of Israel. They test them on Palestinians, and then we, in Britain, we buy them as battle tested. We use them on our borders, etc. So he was giving a witness statement against Elbit because when he did live in Gaza, a drone dropped a bomb on him, and his friend murdered his friend and nearly murdered him, but he had survived after 30 plus surgeries.
Lord.
Young lad. But anyway, he got unwell, so I saw him and I stayed with him 2 hours later because I was just helping him, etc., translation, etc. So I was walking home after that, and I saw an email from Felix Pope from the Jewish Chronicle, and it said, I'm going to write about you, and I'm going to say that you are an anti-Semite, and that you pose a danger to Jewish patients in the NHS.
Why? Because who overheard you? Did somebody report you to him? How did he get the story?
Well, there's no story. He just said that he quoted a social media post where I said, where I spoke about Israeli settlers.
Right.
Yeah, and I said the illegal Israeli settlers stole Palestinian land, something like that. And it said that, I'm basically putting a libel on all Israelis, and that's anti-Semitic, and that's going to raise concerns in the NHS. And just that scenario of just having left the hospital dealing with that to then being told that because I posted about the Holocaust in Gaza, that I'm somehow anti-Semitic as a Semite, and that's going to raise concerns. It was really shocking for me, to be honest. And I was really soft back then. It did make me tear up a little bit because I just thought this is so unfair. This is really unjust, and I could only challenge that in emotion. Anyway, I responded after getting legal advice, and I didn't hear from Felix Pope after. And then it took them until May when I had an email from the GMC to say, you are going to be investigated. Why? Because the UKLFI, exactly the same thing, UKLFI used the Nashr Jew doxing profile to send a complaint in to the GMC. So an investigation is going to start. And that investigation took 9 months. I responded to the allegations of anti-Semitism, and actually, in my response, I affirmed that I'm a Semite. And in the GMC response to me, they reaffirmed that as a Palestinian, as part Palestinian, she is a Semite. And so anti-Semitism doesn't really make sense. And I did put forward the argument that if you call it anti-Jewish hatred, most allegations would be nullified then, because it's very specific then. Where is the hate? But anti-Semitism is really
vague enough.
Vague, exactly, yeah. So they affirmed that, the GMC affirmed that. And then, so I responded to the allegations of that because the UKLFI said that I'm an anti-Semite and that I support terrorism. But the GMC didn't take the terrorism thing on, because I'm not silly and I know the law. And then I won the investigation, 9 months. I got my response. Nothing, and the GMC said that my speech was political and it draws the highest level of protection under Article 10. It's my human right. It's called free speech. Doctors have free speech and have human rights too.
Yes.
But if anything, we actually have a bigger responsibility to speak out against injustice because of our position in society as healers and preservers of life. So the Israeli lobbies did not like that at all. And clearly they were ready to see what happens. And so 2 days later, they published me in the Daily Mail. It was a big defamation article where my face, the picture that they printed was larger than my physical face in there. And the title was, "Are Jews Safe in the NHS?"
Good Lord.
This is February, so this is a year plus, or over 100,000 Palestinians murdered. More than 30 people that I know and love, not family, but I know them, I'm speaking to them regularly, had been murdered. And my friends, one friend that I've grown up with, from home here in Britain, she had lost at that point 21 members of her family. These are close family friends. So you're saying, are Jews safe in the NHS? That was...
Well, it's not going to be lost on a lot of our audience that doctors in Gaza have been deliberately targeted. It's a thing. Not only targeted, but there's now clear evidence of a doctor and several other doctors either being raped and tortured and murdered. Kidnapping is just normal. And hospitals, virtually every hospital in Gaza has been annihilated in one shape or form. And that has been a targeted reality. And yet here we have Zionists, knowing that that's going on, chasing people who are in the NHS and accusing them of anti-Semitism and their doctors as well. The irony is not lost on me, but I'm going to come back to you, Rihanna. We're going to come back a little bit to get a little more, because the human story behind these issues is very important. Your emotional, your state, the effect on your family, the effect on your reputation. I want to get into that as well. But I'm going to switch back to the case that you've, as it was. People all across social media started celebrating Rihanna recently when they heard that you'd the kind of case that you had put forward. It was a victory, but just first unpack what the victory was and against whom, because there's so many parties involved in this first. Yeah.
So the High Court hearing was on the 10th of July. It's the earliest date I could get, and the tribunal hearing. So the interim orders panel. The MPTS, this is the body that has the decision to suspend you or not. The General Medical Council wanted now to keep me suspended. So having back in December not argued for my suspension, that argued for conditions on my license, i.e. probably on my speech, they now decided that, and that was in the public interest, they obviously decided that public interest was not strong enough, so they now introduced a second ground and said they wanted to keep me suspended for the 18 months, but also to protect the public, okay, so to protect the patients, in addition to public interest, which they don't define, which we can go into. And initially that hearing was going to be first on the 16th of June. Now, I had been in Kashmir for a couple of reasons. The most important was that my brother had been assassinated back in March 2022, so the case was ongoing. But I had said to the MPTS that I wanted this to be a public hearing, and I was definitely going to be present in person. And that this time, because previously, there had been an email sent to them saying, on no planet would I have thought that they could suspend a doctor for their free speech. Okay, like it was not even like within my thinking that they would be crazy enough to do that.
Right.
Okay, and one of the arguments they used was that she had. So we had sent an email saying, you know, I will not accept any restrictions on my free speech. Okay, now whatever I had said, it doesn't mean that whatever. If they had decided to sanction me, you always have to start with the lowest sanction. Okay, they used that email as a pretext. Despite saying I want to be before the panel, but I can't because I had commitments, they used that to say she will not accept conditions. We have no evidence that she will comply, and we don't believe she will attend, despite at least 5 references in emails saying I will, I have the hearing on the 13th of January. We talked about this before, and they said we don't believe that she will appear before the panel. Suspension. Okay, so on this occasion, I said I don't want to be so remiss as I was before. I just want to make it very clear to you that I will not accept any conditions, a suspension or any warning on my license. Okay, so you don't make that same mistake again. No. I was being slightly facetious. But they had put the hearing in the afternoon, despite knowing the bundle of all the things they wanted to look at was apparently over 1,000 pages. So I think, again, that was probably slightly deliberate because they would know that this could not happen within a couple of hours.
Right.
So we started the hearing. And most of it was a little bit initially off record because the first thing the GMC tried to do was they tried to introduce my arrest. So just before I came back...
Your arrest at the airport.
You're
going to have to tell us about that as well now. That's an update.
Yeah, so basically, I had literally flown in and I had, because of the flights that were available, I flew from Selcourt to Dublin. Actually, I spent a day in Dublin. And... I hate flights generally, so I rested in Dublin and then I decided to take the ferry to Holyhead and I was going to take a train. I was dreading the train actually, but it seems I shouldn't have bothered worrying. So when I got the ferry the next day, I arrived in Holyhead, obviously at the border, they looked at the passport and said, you need to come over here. And I said, why? And they said, you're on the wanted list. So I was on the wanted list, all right? So I was arrested under Section 12.
Wanted list for what?
So apparently for...
Terrorism?
Yes, so I was arrested under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act, okay? For alleged support of prescribed organisations, okay? So I have to confess, the police in Wales were very nice. They had no other person in their cells apart from me. So a consultant neurologist, I think they were looking slightly bemused. So I had an interesting time telling them about the Israel lobbies and how Britain should be sovereign. And we talked about the Talmud and the extremism of Israel and how our politicians were bought.
Maybe they should send you to prison, Rihanna. You could educate the entire prison population as well, perhaps. You started with the police. Okay.
So I was apparently told I was going to be interviewed by the counter-terrorism unit and they were going to come to North Wales. So then they changed the plan and they decided that they were going to come and collect me and then take me to Yorkshire, West Yorkshire. So they sent 5 police officers, in 2 cars, and to collect me. So I was handcuffed and taken to Normanton in West Yorkshire. And I managed to get a lawyer. And so around about 9:45 or so in the evening, I was being interviewed. And even I was, at one point, I have to confess, I had to ask them for a break for 5 minutes because I had to laugh. Okay, right? Because I thought literally the things that I was being shown, I'm not trying to make light. I mean, it's not light. It's actually offensive to be arrested, for alleged support of terrorism when the people committing the terrorism are the very people interviewing you and the very government that introduces this law. So, but they were showing me effectively 6 tweets. All of them were reposts from Suppressed News, which is a news platform on X, which is like over 1 million followers. Okay? And it was like videos, and it's like, do you know, can you see that logo? That's the Hamas logo. It's news, right? So I was advised not to comment. As you can imagine, that's probably quite hard for me to bite my lip and and so say no comment to everything. And that's the best they had. That was what was preposterous. I mean, literally, like 4 reposts. One was something on Israel and Iran, so nothing to do with any prescribed organisations. And then they'd taken my passport as well. So apparently I couldn't travel, so I had conditions as they do for Section 12. And one of them was they took my devices. So now I had no mobile, no laptop. And they wouldn't give me my GMC files back. And I was like, well, I need them for Monday.
They took your phone away as well?
Yeah, so my phones were confiscated, my laptop was confiscated, and they took my passport.
Have they given those back yet?
No, right? So I just wished them well, and I said there were lots of things on there that would be very interesting. They could learn a lot, from the various gallery. They took my GMC files, and they said they would return them, which they didn't do. So I think a lot of it was for disruption. Like, it was literally to kind of put me on the back foot, because...
and your case was coming up.
So literally it was... so I was arrested on the Wednesday morning, okay? And my hearing was on the Monday. And I just flown back. So I then had to borrow a laptop, borrow, a phone. It's all a bit disorientating. And on that Monday, the first hearing, the GMC... So within 24 hours of my arrest, which is not reportable because I've not been charged and I'm not convicted of any crime, you don't have to report it to the GMC. But within 24 hours of my arrest, the GMC, this is from disclosures, the GMC was actively seeking information about the arrest from counterterrorism.
Because they wanted to use it in this hearing.
Yeah, well, that's actually what's suspicious, right? So if you feel that you've got enough on me to keep me suspended, why do you need to keep adding more to throw more mud? So we managed to get the panel. Obviously I raised objections to that at the hearing, because arrest is not reportable. It has no relevance. The GMC even tried and use a piece of the interim order guidance which related to sexual offences. Which this is not about sexual offences, right? The rest was not about sexual offences. It was to do with sex. So the panel agreed that they would not factor in the arrest. So then the hearing was delayed to the 14th of July. So I had the hearing in the High Court where I represented myself. I was hoping the judge would give at least direction to the panel, because I have no faith in the NPTS or the GMC at that point. They'd abused process so much. And what happened was that the judge did have the flexibility to at least issue either direction or a judgment, and the formal judgment coming later, to say the suspension was unlawful. Everything points towards that. 2 days before, the GMC submitted their skeleton arguments. Normally you submit at least a week or two before. So again, they were trying to wrong-foot me. They also accepted 2 days before that hearing that they had made an error in law, which in my book means that actually you should throw the case out.
Sure.
They've just admitted at least making an error. They said my Article 10 rights had not been engaged, and they were engaged. And
the Article 10 rights, just for the audience?
So refer to, obviously, freedom of speech under the European Convention of Human Rights. So they had said it back in December. They were not engaged. You're suspended, so they're not engaged. And I was saying, well, they are engaged. You're suspending me for my free speech. So they accepted this error in law literally less than 48 hours before the court hearing, and they wanted the judge to make an original jurisdiction on the suspension,
right?
And said you have original independent jurisdiction on it. The judge said she would give the judgment early next week, so that would have been last week. I still haven't had that, which meant that I had to go to the hearing on the Monday the 14th, where I had to do everything again,
right?
To convince the panel that. My suspension was wrong. It was disproportionate, and that, the GMC were suspending me on these allegations that were not proven, number one. And number two, at both times, they have never explained what they refer to by public confidence or risk. They can't define it. They use these terminology, and they can't define what risk I pose to anyone, let alone to Jewish patients. And the panel had to come to a decision, which they did that evening, and that's what the celebration was about, because they revoked that suspension order.
Right. So the GMC suspension order was revoked at that.
Yes, the original suspension order from December was revoked. So I can work again. The investigation's ongoing. But what then happened the next day, which I thought I might get a day's break, was the GMC tried to prevent. So having made the argument that they were original and separate jurisdictions.
Yes.
The tribunal and the judge is independent, to make separate decisions. On the Tuesday, the day after the suspension was revoked, the GMC was busy writing to the court saying that you don't have to make an order on this case because the suspension has been revoked.
Why?
Well, I obviously objected, okay? And the reason I objected was, number one, I had taken the GMC to court. We'd had the hearing and the judgment is expected. The judge has original jurisdiction. And I think the reason for that is that what the IoT panel had done was essentially say, yeah, we've revoked your order. But they don't say anything about all the dishonesty, all the procedural abuse, that I had basically, been subject to from the last panel, who had lied blatantly throughout that whole transcript. And I told them, I spelled this all out, all the lies that they were basically on record and that could be easily disproven. So the only person who can rule that my suspension order was unlawful is the High Court, which they should do. If all things being fair, despite my misgivings at British judiciary, all things being fair, that I should win. And I'm expecting to win unless there's some funny business.
Sure. So fascinating. And I'll come on to Wes Streeting and his kind of involvement as well after this sort of decision. But coming back to you, Rahman, you've heard this case and you've heard my kind of earlier submission about the international discrimination against Palestinians, basically, against Gazans, in terms of ignoring the claims, the genocide, allegations. South Africa put them forward. It's pretty much a done and dusted case, but it's been subject to all sorts of threats from the US. Karim, the chief, I think, lawyer in action, has been literally attacked. Albanese has been attacked. Anybody who says anything, it seems that though the Americans or the Western Zionist alliance has an ability to go in. Here again, with Rihanna at this level, we can see that they're not letting go. They continually try to find new loopholes, new ways of oppressing people. Freedoms of speech, our rights as citizens, the amount of power and control that Zionists have within the British establishment, how much does that concern you, and in relation to your own case as well?
The power of the Israeli lobby in the UK is greater than any other power, in my opinion. I don't think there's anyone else, any other entity that funds 25% of our MPs. So that in itself is undermining our democracy, our sovereignty, because those MPs, we hear over and over that they have made certain pledges to the Jewish labor movement, to conservative friends of Israel, labor friends of Israel, and then we see them being questioned on very basic human moral sort of tests. So of this is awful. The terrorist entity of Israel shouldn't be bombing hospitals and schools, and they can't say anything against that entity because they are being funded by that entity. And so when you are a British candidate in Parliament, in a House of Commons, and you're being funded by a foreign entity that is genocidal, and you cannot utter a word against that entity, you are a foreign agent. You are not speaking on behalf of the British, you are speaking on behalf of your funders. And your funders are killing killing kids, are responsible for the biggest cohort of child amputees in the world. You are in our House of Commons, you're representing the entity and the society that protested against persecuting or prosecuting any Israeli IOF soldier who rapes Palestinians. They didn't like that. They didn't want them to be prosecuted. They wanted them out of the prison. They said, no, they're allowed. And in their Knesset, in their parliament, they debated the legitimacy of raping Palestinians. So you as a British, if you're Wes Streeting, our health secretary, you are representing who? You're representing not just a foreign entity, but a foreign entity of pure evil that the world has never seen, and we can't actually see any worse. It's gone beyond the imagination. And so every time it does something, today, the IOF bombed a nursery, children's nursery, kindergarten, twice. So these are things that you just don't see. You don't have to, Muslim, we have the oldest Christian community in the world, Palestinians. We're very proud of our Christian families. The IOF bombed the Orthodox Church this week for the second time. The Americans were really annoyed, especially white Christian Americans were really annoyed at that. That was the second time, but it just doesn't get out there. So that's what you're representing. And I think because our media speaks on behalf of a foreign entity also, it speaks on behalf of Israel. It literally quotes Israeli officials, the same Israeli officials who have said they are Amalek. The 188th commandment in the Torah of Amalek, which is wipe them out, man, woman, child, infant, animal. That's the definition of genocide, and you are representing them on behalf of the Brits. And I think the Brits need to wake up to that.
So
our media won't wake up.
So you as a British doctor are potentially being harassed about serving British patients by a foreign agency, by foreign agents, essentially,
yes.
Aided and abetted by the likes of Wes Streeting, who get money
yes.
from those agents, because it's on record that Wes Streeting has taken cash from Zionist lobbies. I think Loki and all sorts of other people, Professor David Miller, they have the evidence.
Declassified.
Yeah. So it's public knowledge. It's not something I'm clutching out of the air. That's bizarre, because surely in Britain, a British citizen should be the first individual that is protected by the British government or the British media or any of the British establishment. Instead, what you're describing to me sounds like you're actually persona non gratis, and they are the ones who are being nurtured, groomed, and facilitated to attack you. That's something the British public has to take very, very seriously, I would have thought, because it shows to me quite clearly that there is a huge compromise. How is it affecting your case now, this targeting, this kind of witch hunting? You said you had a 9-month case and you got out of the suspension. What's the current status with you?
So I wasn't suspended. I was being investigated.
Right.
It held back my revalidation. My career is currently held back by 2 years minimum. So as I accept, we have to sacrifice to stand up for Palestine. We know that all our lives. But you said, the British public have to take it really seriously. And when I try and put this forward to the British public, I say, not my case. I don't need you to take my case seriously. But what is happening is that if I'm being attacked, I cannot serve you. My patients are British, not Israeli.
Yes. I
don't serve that entity, and I never would. I wouldn't go there, and I wouldn't uphold it because I think it shouldn't exist. It should be dismantled. I don't think any group, person, or entity, organization should get any chance to be whatever entity group it is after a Holocaust. There should be justice, and that shouldn't exist. So if I'm being taken away from you as the British public, and I'm a hard worker, and I've made mistakes, so I don't have to be brilliant, but it costs a lot to train us as doctors. Yeah, my salary is from you. Yeah, you pay your taxes so that I can serve you.
Sure.
And you're my fellow Brits, you're my friends, you're my neighbours. Yeah, I've never had a problem with Brits. I am a Brit. Yeah, and so I'm being taken away from you to treat you. Yeah, your grandmother might have to wait an extra week to have her knee replacement if we are being taken away from you. That's more important to me. Your grandma being able to walk without pain in her knee is more important to me than being silenced against that should be more important for the British government.
For sure.
Yeah, so why is that? And I think if the British public can actually wake up to that's happening, and it's not just that they want us to stop talking, it's the fact that when we've refused to stop talking because we say part of our moral, code, our ethical code, our Hippocratic oath as doctors is that we cannot be silent when our colleagues are being raped to death in Israeli dungeons. Dr. Adnan al-Bursh orthopedic surgeon,
Yes.
had a fellowship from King's College London. So not only was he an international colleague, he was a British colleague at some point.
He was the one who was tortured, assaulted, and killed, isn't he?
And raped, yeah.
Raped, yeah.
And they still have his body hostage since April last year. His family haven't been able to bury him. So if I can't say that that's awful and shouldn't happen, then how am I upholding anything of what we're taught is our ethical... What I say is that Israel is decimating not just international law, it's decimating medicine physically by means of bombing every hospital, every GP, every clinic, murdering 1,588 medics. This is unprecedented in history, but they're also trying to stop us living by the moral code and ethics that mean that we're good practitioners. That's what, the GMC, good medical practice. If you want me to abide by that, it means that I'm against that entity of Israel. That's where the confliction is. So if I abide by what you want me to be as a doctor, a British doctor in the GMC, and speak out, then I'm against Israel, because Israel is not moral. It's immoral. And instead of allowing me to do that, they want to silence me. And if I'm resisting that and saying I can't be silenced because I will not be bought and I will not be threatened, I will uphold this, and I will lose my career. I'll be very sad for my British patients. That's the biggest sadness. Okay, I could be homeless. Take away my livelihood, because that's what they threaten you with. Rihanna didn't have an income for the 7 months. Is she going to get that? No. That's awful. We are doctors. Some of us have children. We have bills.
Bills to pay, mortgages to pay.
Exactly. And so not only is that, so now if we go further and we say, I'm not going to stop talking, I will highlight these atrocities. They're now going to their agents in Parliament to say, you need to pass legislation to bypass the GMC, who set the moral code for doctors, who are already biased for Israel since they argued to keep Rihanna suspended. And then where's it saying to them, that's my favorite puzzle, because it doesn't cost any money and we have a majority in Parliament. That's not the British public. He's saying he is part of the Israeli lobby and we have a majority to pass legislation to suspend, persecute doctors who uphold the medical ethical code and take them away from the British public. I mean, that is the absolute opposite of being patriotic. That is Israel first.
Israel first, not Britain first.
At the expense of the lives and the care and the healthcare of British citizens.
And this is in a government and an environment in Britain where we're being told that actually foreigners and immigrants are the problem. The doctors that serve the public here, aren't necessarily, of course, mentioned in that breath when they're talking about immigrants. And also what we're seeing is a foreign entity and not even immigrants, not even British citizens, essentially dictating how the British public should be served. There's a lot of very nasty stuff to unpack there. We're coming to the end of the show, unfortunately, Rihanna, but we can do it again. Of course, there's so much to talk about. But in terms of listening to Rahma and to the plight of other doctors, because you're not the only ones. Ranjit Brar comes to mind. Others that I know who've spoken up to the truth. I think Bob Gill's been in talking about other issues, vaccines and other things. But it does seem to be an environment of suppressing honest voices. And in a nation where we've been supposedly used to free speech, democracy, liberty, we actually attacked Muslims for burning books, Salman Rushdie's, satanic verses, and it was the hue and cry. We had a hue and cry about Charlie Hebdo, being attacked and terrorist attacks going on there, and a handful of French people were killed. You've had killings by essentially what I guess you guys would argue is a terrorist state to the scale of a Holocaust and a genocide. Yet you have a British government or a French government, etc., who've done nothing like that. No locking of arms, no leaders marching, no hue and cry about the terrorism and the death. And it smacks of hypocrisy and almost, I would say, Western European, perhaps white supremacy but certainly this kind of supremacy, which is not something which I think the general British public would really be comfortable with owning. Where do we go from here? In conclusion to this, these witch hunts are going on. Your case is now being taken to the next level, where we're hearing that a minister, somebody who's elected, an elected member of parliament, and his government, will very likely consider going to the next level of trying to suppress the freedoms that we've all come to expect to be normal. Where does it go from here?
So there's one thing I would probably disagree in what you just said, and that was basically white supremacy, okay? Because I don't think it's white supremacy.
Okay.
I could probably criticize white people and white supremacy to my heart's content and nothing would happen to me. What I critiqued, and I think what people are beginning to see, and I think it's very much now in evidence, is Jewish supremacy. And the lobby can take this interview and say, there she is peddling some more tropes. But the point is, I'm tired of these labels. I've been labeled as a Nazi, I've been labeled as an anti-Semite, and these are now basically just like it's water on a duck's back, okay? Quite frankly, these are slurs to try and prevent people, to inhibit people from speaking truth, okay? So if Wes Streeting has taken money from the Israel lobby, right, he is, as Rahmeh said, effectively a foreign agent. He's working for a foreign entity. I don't call Israel a state. I refuse to. It doesn't have the legitimacy of a state. And so, but what we're demonstrating is that we have many people in many institutions, including the government, whose loyalty lies to a foreign entity. Okay, we see them. Some of them will be Jewish, and some of them basically are going to be what we call Zionist, i.e. that they are either blackmailed or they're bribed. So Wes Streeting is not Jewish, but he's clearly had money, up to 70,000 in terms of value.
Cheap.
It's incredibly cheap.
They sell out for very little.
We know Yvette Cooper, who obviously prescribed Palestine Action, has received in approximately 215,000. It's still cheap to sell your soul for that amount. So it's when you realize that actually, and what this week demonstrated, I think blatantly to everyone, I obviously alleged that there was political interference. It's right there, openly displayed. Okay, the Jewish medical, so Wes Streeting has met with, the Jewish Leadership Council. He's met with the Board of Deputies. They're having a meltdown. The suspension order, was revoked. They're having a meltdown. They're actually trying to state, if you think about it, if people actually think about it, they're stating that, we have reported hundreds of doctors, okay? So I was the most sanctioned, okay? I was the most attacked. And probably because I was, when you hit the truth, then the truth hurts. And that's when they go after you, right? And I believe that I was talking the truth because I'm talking about the occupation of the UK, right? This country is occupied. It effectively serves Israel to the detriment of its own population. Because I don't think it benefits the British public to have our resources, millions and millions, spent basically on flights to basically to help Israel, to target, freedom fighters there. That doesn't serve the British public at all when we can't fund the NHS and pensioners can't heat their homes, for example.
Right.
Kids, are using, families are using food banks. My point is, he met all these individuals, okay? They can get meetings. Jewish organizations, okay, and pro-Israeli organizations, they can get meetings with the health secretary just like that, okay? Where's that meeting from Wes Streeting with the 99.5%, okay, of the population who want to say to him, actually, you know what, we do oppose the Holocaust in Palestine because public opinion is not with the government. The public opinion is not with the lobbies. It's actually against the mass slaughter. So that's my call today to Wes Streeting. You are a British health secretary, and your duty is to the British public, and we need a meeting with you so you understand where the strength of feeling is when you are targeting doctors, and he needs to ignore calls, for example, by the Jewish Medical Association and the Jewish Leadership Council and the Board of Deputies who say that we should have stronger sanction when people are accused of anti-Semitism. So you can have mere allegations. You are not guilty. They want to punish you before you're proven guilty. So they want you hung, drawn, and quartered before you're even found guilty. This is like the very opposite of what justice is. And they are asking for special privileges for that one group, right? And that goes against everything that I think the British, I think an ordinary Briton would actually state, that either we are all equal or we are not, right? And I would say that I think they have overplayed their hand, because I think they have shown that Jewish power is very real in this country.
Well, very powerful summary there, and some real positive suggestions. So, West Streeting, if you're listening, get yourself down to the people instead of wandering around in the heights.
West Streeting is not going to escape. At some point, West Streeting, we're going to find you.
Well, last word goes to you, Rahma. I've been watching this week, and it's been accelerating over the last fortnight or so, 85-year-old British ladies with not a single blemish on their track record, people who've paid their bills and raised families and worked for this country and built it. Priests, one priestess, an 85-year-old priestess who was an Anglican priest, who was literally ushered away by the police. Others sitting there giving their statements as the police are arresting them. It's bizarre that we're now in a Britain where the police are being weaponized against ordinary citizens who are simply asking for a genocide and a Holocaust to be recognized and to be stopped, or at least for us to resist it. As a Palestinian, as somebody who's obviously, whose heart and soul is clearly going to be torn up far more than even mine or any other human beings because of the proximity of the whole situation to you. What's your hope now? I mean, you're going to continue to struggle on the front line. What's your hope, and what is your desire that the British establishment should be doing, and what should the British public should be doing? Not just those little old ladies and the Palestine Action crew, or the same guys who've been turning up for demonstrations. What should the wider public now do?
Well, in terms of the old ladies and gents who are being arrested because they are showing support for Palestine Action, which is now a proscribed organization, I just want the British public to realize something, because as Palestinians, or Muslims especially, and Arabs, we know very well why the Terrorism Act was put in place 2001, and that was to stop anybody showing support for the people that were going to be proscribed as terrorists. What did that do? That eventually led to the murder of the public of where those proscribed groups were. So you proscribe Hamas, Palestinians in Gaza are being mass murdered. You prescribe the Taliban, Afghanistanis were mass murdered. Saddam, Iraq, so you say somewhere there's a terrorist group who eventually, what happens, because that's the first level of oppression, that state-sanctioned silencing, that you've had your rights taken away right there. And what does that lead to? History shows us this is the war of terror on the Middle East, and we have been murdered. 40 million plus Muslims have been murdered since that law came in. This is the first time in this country that a group from this country who were resisting the state, because we were resisting the British complicity of the genocide, have been proscribed. So if history shows you anything, it means you need to get up now and oppose that silencing, because what tends to happen is this sets the scene that the oppression coming, such as West Streeting trying to push legislation through, people are going to want to resist that, and it's going to get worse and worse. And then when we do have British men and women really resisting, you're going to have murder. You're going to have state-sanctioned mass murder and potentially genocide. So you have to really wake up now. This has not happened in Britain before, and I think it should be extremely frightening.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rahma, and thank you very much, Dr. Rihanna. Both of you really given us so much to think about, and I think it's going to run and run. This is a struggle that I think is not going to stop. But to the audience, I think we've all got to reflect. What happens in faraway lands, in Gaza in particular, let me home in on Gaza in particular, is not that a million miles away from what might very well be happening here already. The lavender systems for the AI, which honed in and detected individual journalists, individual doctors for targeting, the drones that were part of that operation, the entire mechanism of, for instance, the Pegasus spy mechanism, which is known to be an Israeli mechanism which spied on our own MPs, on our very own establishment. The links that these things bring is a world in which transhumanism and modern technology is advancing so rapidly, and we can all be really happy about having virtual reality on our mobile phones. We can be really happy about being able to access things through satellites and whatnot. But what my question is if those technologies in the hands of the likes of the psychopaths, and that's the only other thing I can say, because really anybody who supports Israel now, anybody who goes on to Piers Morgan's show now and defends Israel, actually, literally, is a psychopath. I mean, how else do you describe somebody now after they've seen 300,000 plus deaths? Because that's the number in Gaza. It's not the 58 and the 60,000 they're telling you. The reality is, from the Harvard studies and from the Lancet report, they've been saying it loud and clear that there's well over perhaps even 2 to 3 million people who at least 300,000 people that are not on the lists anymore. How's that happened? It's happened through this use of technology, through the violation of law, through the exceptionalism of Israel, through the complicity of British governments and our military, through the collaboration of our deep state and our infrastructures. All of this is now pretty much in the open. People like Loki, you look at any of the Double Down News, you look at any of the real news outlets, they've given umpteenth amounts of evidence, British shipments to Israel alone from the Cyprus RAF bases that Britain has. At least 16 shipments of Britain's arms have gone, and each one of those shipments has around 160,000 military arms or parts of other weapons, missiles, etc. This is all because we voted in, time and time again, people who are essentially allied to a bunch of psychopaths in Israel. And we're the ones voting them in. We're the ones who are sanctioning that now our own citizens, little old ladies who are priests and whatnot, being arrested on our streets. And we've come to an impasse. We have to ask ourselves, where are we going now? Where do you want Britain to go? Are we going to all just silently allow this kind of passive movement towards a surveillance capitalism? Not even a surveillance capitalism, I'd call it a surveillance totalitarianism, the way we're going. That's the way Starmer is acting, and that's the way certainly the Tories will act, and even more so the Reform, because they all seem to be beholden to the same powers. I rarely make a little speech at the end of one of these shows, but I've been inspired by the ladies kind of on the front line who put us to shame in terms of their own bravery and courage in taking on an entire system. It takes guts, and I salute the ladies with us tonight, and all those who are struggling against the villains that are out there trying to really arrogantly show their power through legislature, through courts, through the British establishment. Well, you don't scare us, because the worst thing you can do here is stick us in a prison, and then we'll just go and convert everybody in prison and tell them about it, right? So you're going to have even more people converted. I'd recommend you surrender now and hand over the rights to the people that they want, and stop this nonsense, and put the Jewish supremacy back in the Pandora's box, which you have opened, and put them on the same level, on an equality level with the rest of citizenry. And certainly don't listen to Israel, and stop selling our country, our funds, our money, our rights, because they want to kill more babies. Piers Morgan, you said there were 40 babies that were killed from Palestine. Now you're running like a chicken into the background. The truth is that you are part of the genocidal propaganda, even though today you say you support the Palestinians and you're condemning Israel. We see you all. We've known you, we've seen you, and this show is here to not only expose those liars, but also to platform those brave individuals who are fighting that very system. And they're fighting not for themselves, but for the freedom of the entire world, as far as I can see. Thank you for watching this edition of Deep Dive Perspective. Goodbye.